Hello, this is Hit Pause, a podcast made in San Francisco with more questions than answers. Hello, and welcome back to Hit Pause. This is our 9th episode together, and it feels already like an adventure, a weekly ritual to me, and I hope to you. We're not dealing with easy topics, even when the news of the day of the week are good. And this week, unfortunately, the news of the world are not good. I've been trying very hard during this Hit Pause podcast to not address very directly the daily occurrences of what's going on in the world, but this week is a bit of an exception because of the magnitude of the despair, the gravity of the death of George Floyd, which has triggered a lot of unrest. As we all know, curfews are now in effect during the night in more than 40 cities in the United States. And I cannot but think about the arc, the path, and my own personal voyage at designing this Hit Pause podcast, the analysis of how we got into this new media world, the evolution of media from print to radio to TV and images to social media, and how we have explored over the past episodes the new container, to use the term explored earlier, how we have now a new container of that rapport between the forces of power, the forces of the disenfranchised, the forces of the people of color and the white people, and the force of the images that are now broadcasting on TV, on all screens of the world. A horrible event, the death of George Floyd. I spoke in an episode a week or two ago about the spark that can ignite this container full of pent-up emotions, fueled by the radioactive nuclear reaction of social media, and whether we're at a point in society where social media substrate, the medium itself, need to think about how we deal with the hyper virality of and the impact, the emotional impact of that virality. So there we are, at a time when emotions are flaring up, rightfully so, where the public force is trying to contain them in a grand battle on both sides of that equation. In the last episode, we looked at how, by far and large, the evolution and the move into this new social medium-infused world has been mostly driven by regulations meant to look at two things and two things only. basically the criminal enforcement about clear-cut activities or misdeed, obviously the dark web, the organized crime, child pornography, and on one side. And on the other side, the economic relationship between content creators and the established media, television channels, the fight of those television broadcasters and channels with YouTube, the cease and desist letters, the evolution of the music business from a CD-ROM physical medium to a digital streaming, and how, by far and large, the regulator was really focusing its sights on the economy, the exchange of money between content creators, distributors, and the so-called platform companies, or they call themselves so much, and whether they are publishers or just platforms, and whether they have a responsibility as a publisher to edit and curate, to rightfully compensate the content creators, and what are the latest regulations coming online in 2021 with Directive 17, in particular in Europe. Today, though, in a weird artifice of timing, I turn our sights into the moral question of the regulation of free speech in social media. We talked 2 episodes ago about the necessity of the boron rods of social media, and that's what I want to explore in this first part of the podcast. It is important to first state and observe that the social media companies are not inactive or passive in that space. That over the past few years, there has been a mounting realization that we as a society have a novel problem in front of us. And that problem actually comes from the fact that the speed at which those new companies are changing is extremely fast. Ultimately, today you can release a new app, you can release a new feature in a relatively new period of time, short period of time. Maybe from a moment of the inception of a new feature and the decision by a software company to its development, to its quality assurance, to its submission to an app store, maybe a few months, maybe 6 months, if the application or the feature is complex. Look at the speed at which COVID-19 distancing applications are now coming online. France will publish its Stop COVID application next week, so in the week of June the 1st. That's only virtually 2.5 elapsed months since France went into quarantine, and the government started realizing something needed to be done. So today, by far and large, the problems of social media companies are fundamentally moral. And I argue that the way they are structured, the way that a social media company is organized, we are not at the stage yet where a CMO, a chief morals officer, is recognized as a necessary function. We may have a chief privacy officer, we may have a chief data officer. Ethics is usually embedded in a code of conduct. Ethics is this nebulous term that we talk about in corporate leadership and management. I use adjective nebulous because it is more attached to values than it incarnates itself into policies, which become documented in regulations, which are expected to be followed by the employees, the vendors, the partners, the board, and all the entities touching an organization. So ultimately, all of those principles, which are really instruments of a certain way of the company to behave. And that is why I think that corporate ethics, remember 5 years ago, ethical governance, sustainability was a theme, was a company investing in building a corporate governance and ethics committee. I think that in this world where we are dematerializing more and more, we are therefore facing, and that is true in the space of social media, we are now more and more facing moral questions. How far should a social media platform, company, publisher, distributor be responsible in a democracy at the self-regulation of the flow of data information that is going through it? What is interesting here is that the double crisis that we are now witnessing, the health crisis with COVID-19 and the social unrest born out of the reaction to racism and oppression on the basis of racism, that double crisis is precipitating a lot of responses. And I see fundamentally or pretty much 4 responses that social media companies are taking. The first one is what I would call rules-based editing. This is the ability for a social media company to remove a post or to create some level of flagging so that a post be then looked at by a human for quality assurance and final decision. And rules-based editing is typically done by artificial intelligence machines that have been coded to recognize an object. And that object could be text, obviously, on the basis of metadata, which is really hard. When you live in a democracy, there is a certain sense of free speech, but some countries, like France and many others, have criminalized racism, have criminalized hate speech, and it is a fine line because ultimately the traditional ways that a society has been regulating and implementing those laws follows a certain judicial process, which by definition is slow, and which ends up in a court of law with a judge or a jury or both, and a certain handling of those. It is obvious that many media companies and publishers historically have been sued for libel and defamation. Those lawsuits take time. and they give time to the system to regulate in a media world which was functioning at slower pace. But in a world of lightning speed, to paraphrase Bill Gates, who wrote more than a decade ago, Business at the Speed of Light, there is a necessary computational process that's applied to an image. I have in previous posts used the metaphor of the algorithms of Facebook editing and censoring a picture of the French painting Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe, only to highlight that point. Object recognition of a woman's breast on a painting of art, on a work of art, needs further improvement of the algorithm and the coding of that algorithm to classify the painting as a work of art and not as obscenity. How do you draw the line when the computer is just a reflection of what has been coded into it? And so what happens is that until the coding becomes more perfect, the computer makes decisions that are impacting the interpretation of moral questions at the speed of light on the basis of an imperfect set of conditions. And from a moral perspective, it is there that the first technique of rules-based editing is flawed. It will get better, but it cannot be the panacea. The resulting of a process, either computer curated, then maybe with human curation behind it, produces the second wave of the response of social media companies, which is to decide to remove a post, an object, a picture, a tweet, or even a user profile for so-called violations of the terms of service. So we go from an editing engine and a first line of decision-making process to a decision that affects the object itself, the post, and the algorithms have been perfected, for example, to recognize a soundtrack, to recognize an audio soundtrack in a video that has been posted online. During the 2010 and onwards, Hollywood and the music studios were hard at work working with the social media platform companies to recognize soundtracks on the basis of the soundtrack databases out there, and being able to expunge or remove or shut off the post or even take out the audio soundtrack if the poster, the publisher of that post, was not showing that they had the license to use that soundtrack. When you push the metaphor to today, what is the canonical guidance that you give to a human curator, whether this particular tweet, this particular post is hate speech? What is the new arbiter of the decision whether you protect free speech or you protect the greater societal good and you make a moral decision? Well, in an age of virality and instant posting, and sometimes on the public space, we no longer follow a process with justice in play. And those decisions get made really, really fast. A novel method, a third one that I'm starting to see appear, which is obviously, given the this week events, really germane to our conversation, is the putting up of a flag, a banner above the commentary, the public post, the tweet, and warn the audience about its content. That is a novel red line that the industry is taking, and everybody will know what I'm talking about. That's a new escalation, and maybe for the better good, actually, of a certain way of the industry searching for its way to implement the famous boron rods of social media in order to slow down or start putting some boundaries around toxicity. The story remains to be seen what will be the impact or the efficacy of this new method, but it is surely a novel experimentation that is developing under our very eyes this very week. And the fourth one that I see as a novel innovation of the social media world is an actual attempt, first one ever, to slow down the virality and the spread of a story. And for the first time, WhatsApp, one of the properties of Facebook, implemented a limit to the number of people that you can re-forward a message that you have received. And that is astonishing because it is the first time that we're seeing a major social player start thinking about the coefficient of the virality of a specific message by putting the user, the end user, in a form of constraint as to how many of their friends or how many people they can forward the message. All of those are born out of the amazing impact of fake news on COVID and the desire of social media companies to regulate their own virality. It is likely, if one wants to be a little cynical, that this desire is probably motivated by the fear of legal responsibility in the pursuit of damages, financial damages, by victims of COVID or the families of victims of COVID. And so we have an amazing triangle between the end user, the social platform, and the regulator / legal entities seeking damages and allocating responsibility between the parties. So we live, surely these days, a pivotal moment in the story of social media, precipitated by the conflation of a health crisis that has triggered on this powder keg of economic disruption born from and brought to us from the technology disruptions of the digital age. We are finding ourselves at a juncture point very clearly. And now, let's go to a short break to hit pause, reflect, or just continue. And we're back to finish our week's exploration of the moral dilemma at hand. Morality is not exactly a term you hear a lot in the Silicon Valley, and how the technology advances are of artificial intelligence, data science, are bringing innovation to lots of industries. People typically feel uncomfortable talking about morality. It's a elusive and topic. Who's moral? What determines what something is moral? Our best philosophers have touched upon that topic in ages where technology was and information flow was going much slower. And yet the same questions are upon us. The only difference now is that the speed at which the technology changes are impacting change on the economy and therefore the social fabric of our own very society is unmatched. And I argue that those questions must therefore be looked at and looked at seriously to create a true exchange between a technology company and its ecosystem actors. To equate that point to the history, I remind myself of a company in France called BSN, Boussois, Souchon, Neuvesel. Little known word in the Anglo-Saxon world, maybe even more in France, but surely known to all of those who work at the company now that we all know as consumer, which is the descendant of BSN, and that is the Danon Group. When you look at what the Danon Group founders initiated to do, it was to create on the turning point after the Second World War, a new rapport between the industrial age, capital investment, and the workforce. And BSN was started by Antoine Riboud and later his son and so on, with a socio-democratic ethics. One can argue even imbued of a progressive Catholic mindset that try to rethink the core values of the human worker at a time when industrialization and machines was starting to automate the production lines of the bottles. BSN was really at the start a company making glass bottles, and later on evolved into putting things in those bottles, those things being milk and water, and gave us Evian, and gave us the Danone milk, and from the milk started producing yogurt, and the rest is history. I'm thinking a lot about BSN as a model of where we are finding ourselves in the technology world of data science and artificial intelligence. We are at a juncture point where AI companies or companies that use AI need to think about the impact on the ecosystem. A CMO, a chief moral officer of an AI company, needs to think about the impact and the absorption of the new services and technologies by the ecosystem of the partners, the vendors, the downstream users, and the users of the customers that they may sell to. In other terms, to have a sense of a complete chain of transformation, a Silicon Valley leader no longer can do the economy of thinking downstream about what will happen to their technology. An example is this week was rich in news. Microsoft announced the laying off of their team of journalists that curate the news and edit the news that are going to be ripe for consumption on the news platform, with the replacement of that staff by artificial intelligence algorithms. So now we are having another advance here in the rapport between AI as a curator to humans as a curator, with AI gaining one more step. I don't deny that this might be more efficient at handling the immense amount of volume of news that need to be filtered, processed, maybe hyper-targeted so that people only get to see the news that they value or have more affinity towards. But at the same time, there is a societal morality question behind that move, which goes well beyond the economic calculation of the editorial board, if you will. Another clear conversation to have is what is the relationship and, if you will, the negotiation between the media branch, which I now consider to be a fourth power in the matters of government, in the matter of the polis, to use the Greek term, which means the matter of the city, the government of the city, the politics. There is a new conversation to be had. Is it appropriate for the head of a social media platform company to have a conversation to, quote unquote, negotiate what that rapport is between power, free speech, censorship, and all the moral questions that we just reviewed in the first part of this episode? Or should there be a sacrosanct separation of powers, one staying in one's role, the political role, and the other staying in the mediatic company, corporate, private role? I'm hinting again and drawing here in this episode again the focus on the concept of boundary, which we will explore at length in the second season of this podcast, because drawing boundaries is really ultimately what keeps us human. So, a heavy episode again by the nature of the week's current events, with a question: will the Silicon Valley listen to the necessity of a dialogue about morality and the moral consequences and implications of what we do. This podcast is a simple way of sharing my thoughts. It is a personal endeavor, nothing more, a way to connect. The views and opinions represented in this podcast are solely mine. They are in no way, nor should they be assumed to be shared, supported, endorsed by my employer, the sponsors of this show, unchartered.fm, where it is hosted, and all the distributors thereof. You may find more information, links, pictures, videos, documents, and more, which may have been referenced in this podcast on my website at www.uteza.com/podcast. There, it feels so much better after saying all of this. And so, it's time to part ways, at least for now. Until next time, time to say goodnight, time to hit pause.